The FBI is investigating threats against the people who are with Nolan Wells in the hours before the Mississippi teen vanished and was found dead. Wells, 18, disappeared July 4th after joining friends on a boat trip to Horn Island, a barrier island off Mississippi's Gulf Coast. Search crews scoured the area for 2 days before a National Park Service ranger found his remains on the island's northwestern tip on July 6th. Wells' friends returned to the mainland that July afternoon without him, but Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter previously said investigators believed Wells chose to stay on the island. It wasn't until later that night that his mother learned that he was missing from one of Wells' friends and reported it to authorities. Mississippi's Department of Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tindall said Wednesday that the FBI is investigating threats made against public officials, the people who were with Wells before he vanished, and their families.
Tonight, after months of silence, dead ends, and a community that refused to let this case go quiet, everything is cracking open at once. A woman at the center of the biggest unanswered question in this case finally came forward. Not through a lawyer. Not through a carefully worded social media post. Face to face with Nolan's mother. The FBI has now formally documented its involvement in writing. New audio and GPS data have emerged that reconstruct the movements of that boat, minute by minute, on the last day Nolan Wells was seen alive. And a family connected to this case has reportedly been targeted by threats serious enough that federal resources are now involved. 4 developments. 1 case. All landing at the same time. Before we go any further, this case involves the disappearance and suspected death of a young man. The details that have emerged are deeply unsettling. Some of what we cover tonight touches on potential threats, possible cover-ups, and a level of institutional pressure that will make you uncomfortable. If you are sensitive to those themes, please take care as you watch. If you are new to Unsolved Files, you have landed on this channel at exactly the right moment. We do not chase clutter. We do not amplify rumors. We track what is confirmed, we name what is still unknown, and we do not let cases like this one disappear into silence. If that is the standard you want in your feed, hit subscribe right now. It costs you nothing and it keeps this work going. Drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you are watching from tonight. This case has drawn attention from across the country and beyond. We want to know where you are joining us from. Now, let's open the file. Before this becomes a case, before it becomes an investigation, before it becomes a national conversation, it was a family. Nolan Xavier Wells grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a Gulf Coast town where Friday nights meant football and everybody knew everybody. He was the kind of young man people describe the same way regardless of how well they knew him. That consistency is either a coincidence or it is a character. With Nolan, it was character. He was one of 6 children raised by Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley. His siblings, Elmore Jr., Ethan, Jalen, Jaden, and Carly, grew up in a household where their father set the tone through action, not instruction. Elmore Wansley has described his son the same way he would describe himself, a silent leader. Someone who did not need an audience to do the right thing. Someone who showed up, put in the work, and let the results speak. He said he preached one rule to Nolan above almost everything else. If you go somewhere with a group, you stay with the group. You do not leave people behind and you do not get left behind. He said he told Nolan that every single day. At Ocean Springs High School, Nolan was a multi-sport athlete, but football was where he stood out. He played wide receiver, a position that requires not just physical ability but precise timing, trust in the people around you, and the discipline to run the right route even when no one is watching. His coach, Jake Braramlett, did not describe him in terms of statistics or highlights. He said Nolan carried himself with humility. That other players followed his actions more than his words. That he led not by being the loudest voice in the room but by being the most consistent one on the field. His principal, Dr. Jacob Dykes, remembered him in similar terms, one of the kindest, hardest working students to come through the building. Someone teachers and teammates gravitated toward without being asked to. Christine Wansley has told one story in particular more than once, and it is worth telling here because it is more than a memory. It is a window. In a math class there was a student with special needs in the room. When the teacher asked a question before anyone else could jump in, Nolan quietly moved through the class and got every other student to put their hands down, so that she could answer on her own without being rushed, without feeling the pressure of competing hands in the air. When she got it right, he led the reaction. Not as a performance. Because he meant it. The teacher emailed Christine afterward just to tell her what happened. Christine has spoken about that story in the context of something she told Nolan more than once. That he had to be careful when he had a heart that big because the world would not always return it the same way. She has said he was genuinely a good person. That all the best parts of her are with him. By the summer of 2026, Nolan had taken that character and that work ethic to the next level. He had earned a spot as a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College. The Monday after the 4th of July weekend, he was scheduled to report for football camp. His parents had already planned to drive him back. He never made it to Monday. Horn Island does not look like a place where things go wrong. It looks like the opposite. It sits roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, south of Pascagoula, inside the Gulf Islands National Seashore, a federally protected stretch of barrier islands that runs along the coastline of Mississippi and Florida. There are no roads on Horn Island. No hotels. No stores. You cannot drive there. The only way in is by private boat, and the only way out is the same. What it has is white sand, clear water, and the kind of quiet that is hard to find anywhere close to a major coast. On a holiday weekend, people come out in groups. They anchor, they swim, they spend the day. Then they go home. Nolan had been to Horn Island before. This was not unfamiliar territory for him. It was a normal place to spend a summer day, and July 4th was a normal reason to go. The morning of July 4th, 2026, the group assembled at Warren Hudson's dock. Surveillance footage from that dock, later shared publicly, shows nearly 24 people moving across 3 boats in preparation for the trip out. It was a large group. A holiday crowd. Nothing about those images suggests anything other than a day off. GPS data obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, later reported by CBS News, gives investigators and the public the clearest factual record of what the boat did that day. The vessel departed the private dock at 9:56 in the morning. It arrived at Horn Island at 11:14 a.m. The group had just over an hour on the water to get there. There are photographs from that day on the island. In one of them, Nolan towers above his friends, his arm casually around someone's shoulders, sunglasses on, smiling. He is wearing blue swim trunks. He looks exactly like what he was, a teenager on a holiday surrounded by people he knew, on an island he had visited before. Nothing in that image signals what the rest of the day would become. He was last seen somewhere between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. The accounts of exactly when vary slightly depending on who is giving them, but that window, 3 to 4 p.m., is where investigators, the family, and every public statement have placed his last confirmed sighting. At 4:31 p.m., the GPS data shows the boat departing Horn Island. Nolan was not on it. His phone was. His keys were. He was not. The boat moved into Fort Bayou at 5:52 p.m. It returned to the private dock at 6:06 p.m. At approximately 7:19 p.m., the vessel was moved again. The GPS record accounts for the boat's location across the entire afternoon and evening. What it cannot account for is Nolan. That detail, the phone, the keys, the boat leaving, Nolan remaining, became the first thing every person who heard about this case asked about. Not as a legal question. As a human one. If you leave somewhere with a group and one person is not on the boat when it pulls away, what do? You go back. Or you call someone. Or you do not leave in the first place. What happened in the stretch between the last time someone saw Nolan Wells standing on that island and the moment the boat's engine turned over and it headed back toward the mainland, that stretch of time, roughly an hour at most, is where this entire investigation is focused. It is where the accounts begin to diverge. It is where the questions that have drawn national attention were born. And it is the window that, as of right now, no one has fully and credibly explained. The GPS data tells us when the boat moved. It does not tell us what happened before it did. That is what this case is about. Everything that follows, every interview, every legal move, every federal resource, every contradicting account, traces directly back to that gap on July 4th between 3 p.m. and 4:31 p.m. on Horn Island. When a case like this one breaks open publicly, the first thing people want to know is who was there. Who saw him last? Who was on that boat when it left? And what exactly each of them is saying now? Those are the right questions. The answers are where this case gets complicated. There were multiple people connected to Nolan's group on Horn Island that day. Some have spoken publicly. Some have hired lawyers. Some have gone silent. And the accounts that have surfaced, when placed side by side, do not fully line up. Warren Hudson described himself as Nolan's best friend. He was present at the dock the morning of July 4th but did not travel out on the same boat Nolan was on. He had contact with Nolan on the island during the day. In the days after Nolan's body was found, Hudson agreed to speak publicly with podcast host Brandon Tatum, and later walked Horn Island with him to retrace the movements of that day. His account is the most detailed on-record version of events from anyone inside that friend group. Hudson said the group made multiple attempts to get Nolan on the boat before they left. Not once. Multiple times. He said Nolan refused each time. His explanation for why: Nolan had met a girl on the island and wanted to stay with her. Hudson said Nolan was not being pressured or pushed. He said Nolan made a choice to stay. On the phone question, why Nolan's phone and keys were on the boat when it departed, Hudson said this was not unusual. He said it was common practice among people spending time on and near the water to leave their phones on the boat specifically to protect them. He said he never saw people walking around Horn Island with their phones out near the water. He presented it as a standard precaution, not a red flag. Hudson also said that when the group returned to the mainland and Nolan still had not made contact, he personally called Christine Wansley. That call lasted approximately 5 minutes. He told her not to panic, then immediately contacted the Coast Guard. He said he grew up on the Gulf Coast and understood how quickly the water could turn dangerous. He said he would rather make the call and be wrong than wait and find out he should have called sooner. The following morning he was back on the water joining the search. He also said something that does not get discussed as much as it should. He said Horn Island is a beautiful place, but a dangerous one. He said he knew other people who had died there before Nolan. He said that context matters when you are trying to understand what the island is and what it is not. Wyatt Pyron was one of the friends who was on the boat with Nolan. The vessel used for the trip belonged to his family. His grandfather, Jerry Atkerson, and his mother, Jennifer Pyron, were contacted by investigators on July 8. Jerry Atkerson signed a permission to search document, giving law enforcement full access to the boat and authority to remove any item or document they considered relevant to the investigation. GPS data was extracted from that vessel. Investigators also separately obtained data from a second boat belonging to a man named Bart Edmiston Jr., which was also present in the area that day. Both Wyatt Pyron and Warren Hudson have since retained private defense attorneys. That decision generated immediate and significant public reaction. Retaining legal counsel does not establish guilt and it does not establish wrongdoing. What it does establish is that both men, through their attorneys, have made a decision about how they will engage with this investigation going forward. That shift was noted publicly and widely. Warren Cole was also on Horn Island that day. He is the son of Chancery Judge Ashley Cole. Warren Cole and Warren Hudson are two different people. The shared first name has caused confusion in public coverage, and the distinction matters for understanding who said what. Warren Cole has been interviewed by the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. Judge Ashley Cole addressed the public directly through a Facebook post in which she confirmed her son's presence on the island, confirmed he had been interviewed by investigators, and stated clearly that no member of her family was attempting to interfere with the investigation in any way. According to Judge Cole's account of what her son told her, Warren Cole last saw Nolan around 3 p.m. on July 4th. At that point, Nolan told him he planned to catch a ride back to the mainland with a different group of friends, not the boat he had arrived on. Judge Cole also disclosed that she deactivated her own social media accounts following Nolan's death. She cited the emotional intensity of the online environment and said she feared for the safety of her children. Several other members of the broader social group have been identified in connection with the day's events. Eli Jax Patalo, Eric Alcantara, and Morgan Seymour were all part of the group present on the island. All three, along with Hudson and Pyron, set their social media accounts to private in the days following Nolan's death. None of them have made public statements. One piece of social media content that drew particular attention in the days after Nolan went missing was a video that began circulating online. In the video, a voice could be heard in what appeared to be a heated argument, and attorney Ben Crump stated publicly that he believed Nolan could be heard in that footage demanding his phone back. The video spread quickly. It became a focal point of online discussion about what had happened on the island. Then Traciston Shepard came forward. Shepard, a high school friend of Nolan's, stated publicly that the voice in the video was his own, not Nolan's. He said the argument captured in the footage was between him and a stranger, someone he did not know, who had initiated a physical altercation with him. He said people on the boat were restraining him from continuing the fight, and that what sounded like a demand for a phone was actually him demanding to be let off the boat so he could keep fighting. He confirmed Nolan is not visible in the video and said the footage had nothing to do with Nolan's phone, Nolan's situation, or anything connected to why Nolan did not come home. That clarification did not fully stop the circulation of that video or the interpretations built around it. But Shepard's account is on record, and it stands as the most direct explanation of what that footage actually shows. Then there is Katie McCormick. Katie McCormick is 19 years old. She was on Horn Island on July 4th with a separate group of friends, not the same group Nolan arrived with. She is the young woman Nolan had been spending time with on the island before the boats began to leave. She has not spoken publicly about this case. Her identity was reported by the Daily Mail. Her sister, Gracie McCormick, has spoken on her behalf. Gracie told the Daily Mail that Katie had a conversation with Nolan during which Katie assumed he was getting ready to return to the boat he arrived on. She said Katie assumed that Nolan's friends would not leave without him. Katie herself later departed Horn Island with her brother and his fiancée. Gracie stated that the McCormick family has cooperated fully with investigators and with the Wells family. Before Katie McCormick was publicly identified, investigators went to the residence of a woman named Lainey, who had initially been reported as the person from the island connected to this part of the story. Lainey was not the woman Nolan had been with. The correct identification, confirmed through the investigation, was Katie McCormick. So here is where the accounts stand as of now. Warren Hudson says Nolan was asked to get on the boat multiple times and chose to stay. Warren Cole, through his mother Judge Ashley Cole, says Nolan told him around 3 p.m. that he was planning to leave with a different group. And Gracie McCormick, speaking for her sister Katie, says Katie believed Nolan was heading back to his own boat, that she had no reason to think he would be stranded. 3 separate accounts. 3 different implications about what Nolan intended to do and what the people around him understood that to be. Ben Crump addressed this directly and publicly. His position was not complicated. He said Katie's account and the friend group's account cannot both be fully accurate. If Katie believed Nolan was getting on his boat, and the friends say Nolan refused to get on the boat, then those 2 things point in opposite directions. Crump's conclusion was straightforward. Somebody is not telling the complete truth about what happened on that island before the boat left. That is not a legal finding. It is not a charge. It is a question. And as of right now it remains unanswered. Christine Wansley did not hear from her son that evening. That fact alone, a mother waiting for a call that does not come on a holiday night, is the moment this case shifted from a missing person situation to something the family could feel in their bones before anyone confirmed anything. She tracked his phone. The signal told her nothing useful. It did not tell her where he was. It told her where his phone was, and his phone was somewhere she could not reach him. She filed a missing persons report the night of July 4th. One of Nolan's friends separately contacted authorities as well. By that point, the window for a same-night search on open water in the dark was already narrowing. What started as a holiday evening ended with a family waiting and a sheriff's department beginning to mobilize. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department, under Sheriff John Ledbetter, launched a formal search operation. The scope of that search reflected how seriously the situation was being treated from the start. Multiple agencies were brought in: the U.S. Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and rangers from the Gulf Islands National Seashore, which administers Horn Island as part of its federally protected territory. The search covered water and land across an island that has no roads, no infrastructure, and no lighting after dark. The United Cajun Navy, a volunteer emergency response organization, also joined the effort. Brian Troshers, the organization's national vice president, confirmed that his team had been in direct contact with Christine Wansley from the moment Nolan was reported missing. They did not wait to be asked. Warren Hudson, who had already contacted the Coast Guard the night before, was back on the water the following morning alongside other family members and friends. He later described the scale of the search: helicopters overhead, airplanes, marine resource officers working the water, law enforcement covering the island on foot. He said it did not look like a small effort. He said it looked like every available resource was deployed. They searched July 5th. They searched into July 6th. At approximately 8:45 in the morning on July 6th, a United States Park Ranger located a body in the water just off the northwestern tip of Horn Island. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind was notified. He confirmed that the body matched Nolan's description. Sheriff John Ledbetter later confirmed to CNN that the body was found just offshore the west end of the island. There were no immediately visible signs of physical injury. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office conducted the official autopsy on July 7th, the day after the body was recovered. That is standard procedure. What is not standard, at least not in the eyes of the family and their legal team, is what came after. The results of that autopsy, including toxicology findings, were not released to the public. As of the time this script was completed, they still have not been. The family was not given the information they needed to understand how their son died. They were left in a silence that the state has not yet broken. Christine Wansley posted publicly in the days that followed. She wrote that she was absolutely devastated. She described Nolan as a special soul. She said her heart was broken for her son, who was always willing to cheer and lift others up. Those were not the words of someone preparing to accept a closed case. They were the words of a mother who had just lost her child and was already asking questions that no one was answering. The family made their position clear without ambiguity. They were calling for a thorough and transparent investigation. They were not willing to accept a narrative handed to them without evidence to support it. And they were not going to stay quiet while the people and institutions with access to answers remained silent. The search was over. The questions were just beginning. And the people with the most information about what happened on Horn Island on the afternoon of July 4th had not said nearly enough. While the family was burying their son, the investigation was expanding. Sheriff John Ledbetter confirmed publicly that the FBI's Jackson Field office had entered the case. He was direct about the nature of that involvement. The Bureau was assisting the Sheriff's Department specifically by examining digital evidence collected during the investigation. He also offered context for why this was not an unusual development. Horn Island falls under federal jurisdiction as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department and the FBI Jackson Field office have an established working relationship when cases involve federal land. Ledbetter framed it as a resource collaboration, not an escalation. But then the FBI released its own statement. And that statement said something different from what a routine collaboration would require. The FBI confirmed to ABC News that the agency was actively working to address interstate threats that had been directed at individuals connected to this case. That is a separate function entirely from reviewing digital evidence. Interstate threats fall under federal criminal statutes. The FBI does not deploy resources to address them as a courtesy. That confirmation meant two distinct FBI operations were running simultaneously. One focused on the evidence gathered at the investigation level, and one focused on threats serious enough in nature and scope to require federal intervention. Those threats were not abstract. Christine Wansley posted about one of them directly on Facebook. Someone had sent a message to her home. She photographed it and posted it publicly, writing that whoever sent it should consider what they had done. She did not describe the contents in detail. She did not need to. The fact that the mother of an 18-year-old whose cause of death had not yet been determined was receiving threatening material at her personal residence, and that the FBI was involved in tracking those threats across state lines, told its own story. On the evidence front, Ben Crump's team launched an independent investigation into Nolan's cell phone. Crump stated publicly that messages had been deleted from the device. He did not specify when those deletions occurred, who was responsible, or what the content of those messages was. That claim has not been independently verified by law enforcement, and no official confirmation of deleted messages has been made public. What is confirmed is that the family's legal team requested and initiated their own digital examination of the phone separate from law enforcement's process. Crump also stated that his team was receiving between 50 and 100 calls per day from people who were on Horn Island that day or who had information connected to individuals who were there. The Sheriff's Department had been working the witness pool aggressively. By the time these details became public, investigators had interviewed more than 60 witnesses. The three friends who traveled with Nolan on the boat to Horn Island had each been interviewed in depth. Sheriff Ledbetter confirmed this. He did not characterize those interviews as complete or as having resolved the central questions in the case. Then came the dispatch audio. A recording from a private towing company was released, captured on the afternoon of July 4th. In the audio, a caller connected to the boat Nolan's friends were using can be heard reporting that the vessel was taking on water. The caller sounds urgent. They ask for assistance. When asked whether everyone on board is safe, the caller confirms that everyone on board is accounted for. Nolan was not on the boat at the time of that call. That audio, combined with the GPS data already obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, gave investigators the most detailed picture yet of the boat's movements and the conditions on the water during the critical window of the afternoon. The GPS record established when the boat left the island. The dispatch audio established that the vessel was in distress on its return. Together they provide a time-stamped account of the boat's afternoon that no single witness statement can replicate or override. The Mississippi Department of Marine Resources became a separate point of note when it was reported that the agency had inadvertently released records connected to Nolan's death before being contacted by the district attorney's office. Once Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath's office was notified, the MDMR was instructed to withhold any further records under the exemption that applies to active criminal investigations. The agency complied and confirmed it would release no additional information while the case remained open. McElrath herself addressed the public directly. She confirmed the case was being treated as a priority by her office. She stated that upon the conclusion of the investigation, the findings would go before a grand jury, which she described as standard procedure in Mississippi for deaths that are not determined to be natural. She was clear that the grand jury would decide whether any charges were warranted based on the facts placed before it. On July 15, Ben Crump met with McElrath alongside the Wells family. Following that meeting, Crump stated publicly that the district attorney had committed to putting every relevant fact before the grand jury. His words were direct: nothing held back, nothing overlooked. The grand jury has not yet convened. When it does, the evidence collected across this investigation, the GPS data, the dispatch audio, the digital records, the 60-plus witness interviews, the autopsy findings, and whatever the independent cell phone examination produces, will be placed before it. If you want to be the first to know what that grand jury finds, subscribe to Unsolved Files right now and drop a comment. This case is not over. And when the next development breaks, you will not find out about it 3 days late. There is a detail about July 4th on Horn Island that did not require investigation to establish. It was visible in the photographs from that day. Nolan Xavier Wells was the only black person in his group. His friends were white. In most circumstances, that detail would be unremarkable. In Mississippi in 2026, with a young black man dead under unexplained circumstances and the people who were last with him offering accounts that do not fully align, that detail became impossible to separate from everything else. Mississippi carries a specific and documented history that does not require elaboration here. What it requires is acknowledgement. When cases involving young black men and unexplained deaths arise in that state, the historical weight of that context arrives with them. That is not speculation. That is the reason this case drew national attention within days of Nolan's body being found, and it is the reason the figures who responded publicly named it directly rather than around it. Sheriff John Ledbetter made an early public statement in which he indicated that no foul play was suspected. That statement landed before the investigation had produced its findings, before the autopsies were complete, before the 60-plus witnesses had been interviewed, before the digital evidence had been examined. Reverend Al Sharpton responded to that statement directly and publicly. His position was clear: you cannot declare the absence of foul play before the investigation that would confirm or deny it has actually been completed. That is not a finding. That is a presumption. And for a family with no answers and a state autopsy sitting unreleased, it was an unacceptable one. Sharpton appeared at a press conference at the National Action Network headquarters in New York on July 10 alongside Christine Wansley. He raised the questions the family had been raising since the night of July 4th. Why did the group leave the island without Nolan? Why did his phone and keys remain on the boat? And why was there a delay in reporting him missing? He did not present those as accusations. He presented them as the questions any responsible investigation would need to answer before closing the file. At Nolan's funeral service, held at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs, Sharpton delivered the eulogy. He spoke about the inconsistencies in the case and the unanswered questions that surrounded it. He said the nation was watching because the nation recognized what it meant when a young black man died under unclear circumstances in Mississippi, and the people responsible for answering questions were moving slowly and speaking prematurely. He pledged $50,000 from the National Action Network as part of a reward fund for information leading to an arrest and conviction if a crime was determined to have occurred. Tyler Perry entered the case with a different kind of action. He paid for Nolan's funeral expenses in full. He did not make that gesture quietly. He posted publicly about it, writing that he knew what it felt like to be in a position where loved ones desperately needed answers and could not get them. He called that experience debilitating. He said it was his hope that Christine and Elmore Wansley would get to the truth of what happened to their son in Mississippi. He also contributed to the reward fund. Former NFL star Terrell Owens contributed to the fund as well. By the time Ben Crump announced the combined total at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago on July 22, the reward stood at $125,000, jointly funded by Sharpton, Perry, and Owens, available to anyone providing information that led to an arrest and conviction in the event a crime was established. Colin Kaepernick's contribution took a different form. He privately funded the independent autopsy commissioned by the Wells family. That autopsy, conducted by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell, was the family's most direct attempt to get answers the state had not yet provided. Attorneys Carlos Moore and Eric Hers are also part of the broader legal presence surrounding this case. The Wells family has assembled a legal team that extends beyond Ben Crump's office alone, reflecting the seriousness with which they are approaching every avenue available to them. What the national response made undeniable is that this case had moved beyond Jackson County, Mississippi. It was no longer being watched only by the people who knew Nolan or lived near Ocean Springs. It was being watched by the country. The questions being asked on the steps of the National Action Network in New York were the same questions Christine Wansley had been asking since the night her son did not come home. The difference was that now the people asking them had the platforms, the resources, and the reach to make sure those questions could not be quietly set aside. On July 21, 2026, Nolan Xavier Wells was laid to rest in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. His family, his friends, his teammates, and his coaches gathered to say goodbye to an 18-year-old who was supposed to be starting football camp the following week. Christine Wansley spoke at the service held at Center Point Church. She said Nolan had a way of making people feel seen, welcome, and valued. That he could lift someone's confidence with just a few words and make them feel like they belonged. A celebration for those who loved him followed the burial. It was the kind of send-off that reflected exactly who he was. The following morning, his parents flew to Chicago. On July 22, 2026, Ben Crump stood before a standing-room-only crowd at the NAACP National Convention and announced the results of the independent autopsy commissioned by the Wells family. Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley stood beside him. The room was full. The weight in it was considerable. The independent autopsy had been funded privately by Colin Kaepernick. It was conducted by Dr. Roger Mitchell, a forensic pathologist with significant experience in high-profile cases. Dr. Mitchell's examination was thorough. His conclusions, by necessity, were measured. The cause and manner of Nolan's death were listed as undetermined, pending further investigation. That finding requires context, because undetermined is not the same as inconclusive in the casual sense of the word. In forensic terms, undetermined is a formal classification. It means the available evidence as examined does not support a definitive conclusion in either direction. It does not mean nothing was found. It means what was found cannot, on its own, support a final determination without additional information. Dr. Mitchell's report documented no evidence of fractures. No deep tissue injuries were identified. Those findings matter because they speak to what the body did and did not show on external and internal examination. But the report also noted something that has not been resolved. A red discoloration was observed on the back of Nolan's skull. Dr. Mitchell described that finding as inconclusive and stated it required further investigation before any interpretation could responsibly be offered. The most significant language in the report was this. Dr. Mitchell wrote that without further information he could not rule out the possibility that non-accidental factors contributed to or caused Nolan's death. That sentence is being read carefully by everyone involved in this case, and it should be read carefully here as well. It is not a finding of homicide. It is not an accusation directed at any individual. What it is, precisely and formally, is a forensic pathologist stating in writing that the evidence as it currently exists does not allow him to exclude the possibility that something other than an accident caused or contributed to this death. That is a meaningful distinction from a conclusion of accidental drowning, and it is a meaningful distinction from a conclusion of homicide. It sits in the space between them, and it will remain there until more information is available. The independent autopsy also carried limitations that Dr. Mitchell acknowledged. The condition of a body recovered from open water after 2 days presents inherent challenges for any examination. Certain findings that would be accessible in other circumstances become more difficult to interpret. Those limitations do not invalidate the examination. They are part of the honest accounting of what the autopsy was working with. Ben Crump used the Chicago platform to make 2 specific requests. First, he called for Dr. Mitchell to be present and included when the case goes before the grand jury. Second, he formally requested that the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office share its autopsy photographs and direct observations of Nolan's body with Dr. Mitchell, so that the independent pathologist can work from the most complete picture possible. As of the time this script was completed, the state autopsy results, including toxicology findings, have still not been released publicly. The Wells family has received no formal conclusions from the state about how their son died. Elmore Wansley stood at that podium in Chicago and said what every person in that room was already thinking. His son should be at football practice, not buried in the ground, not the subject of an autopsy announcement at a national convention. At football practice, where an 18-year-old wide receiver with a future in front of him was supposed to be that Monday morning. Christine said the silence from the state was heartbreaking. That receiving nothing from the official process was precisely why they had made the decisions they made. Why they asked for help. Why they were standing in Chicago asking a room full of people to keep paying attention. The toxicology results from the state autopsy have not been released. When they are, they will be among the most consequential pieces of evidence this investigation produces. Subscribe to Unsolved Files right now so that when those results drop, you are not finding out about it 3 days after the fact. This is the update that could change everything about how this case is understood. Every investigation reaches a point where the confirmed facts have been established, the accounts have been gathered, and what remains is the space between them. This case has reached that point, and that space is significant. Here is what is confirmed. Nolan Xavier Wells was on Horn Island on July 4, 2026. He was last seen between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. His phone and his keys were on the boat when it departed the island at 4:31 p.m. He was not. His body was found on the morning of July 6 at approximately 8:45 a.m., face down in the water off the northwestern tip of Horn Island. The independent autopsy commissioned by his family returned a finding of undetermined cause and manner of death, pending further investigation, and could not rule out the contribution of non-accidental factors. The state autopsy conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on July 7 has not been released. Its toxicology findings remain unavailable to the public and to the family. Those are the facts that no party in this case has disputed. Now here is what is disputed. The central question, whether Nolan chose to remain on Horn Island or whether the circumstances of his being left behind were something other than a voluntary decision, has not been resolved. Warren Hudson's account says Nolan was asked to get on the boat multiple times and declined. Warren Cole's account, relayed through his mother Judge Ashley Cole, says Nolan indicated around 3 p.m. that he planned to return with a different group. Gracie McCormick's account, offered on behalf of her sister Katie, says Katie believed Nolan was heading back to his own boat. These 3 accounts describe 3 different understandings of what Nolan intended to do in the final hour before the boat left. They are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they are not fully consistent either. The question of what Nolan actually communicated to the people around him in that window, and what those people understood or chose to understand, remains open. The phone situation remains contested in interpretation if not in fact. It is confirmed that Nolan's phone was on the boat. Warren Hudson offered an explanation, that leaving phones on the boat near water was standard practice in that group. That explanation has not been corroborated or contradicted by any other named party on record. What it has not resolved is why, if Nolan was planning to return with another group as multiple accounts suggest, no one in either group had direct contact with him after the boat departed. The video that circulated online in the days after Nolan's death, the one Ben Crump initially suggested contained Nolan's voice, was addressed publicly by Trace's Tin Shepard, who stated the voice was his own and the argument was unrelated to Nolan's situation. That clarification is on record. What it exposed, however, is how quickly unverified material in this case moved from social media into formal legal commentary, and how much interpretive weight was placed on evidence before it had been properly examined. Ben Crump's stated claim that messages were deleted from Nolan's cell phone has not been independently verified by law enforcement. The independent cell phone investigation initiated by Crump's team is ongoing. No findings from that process have been made public. Now here is what is new. Wyatt Pyron and Warren Hudson have both retained private defense attorneys. The boat connected to the July 4th trip, owned by Wyatt Pyron's family, specifically his grandfather Jerry Atkerson and his mother Jennifer Pyron, was formally searched by investigators on July 8th. Jerry Atkerson signed the permission to search document voluntarily. GPS data was extracted. Investigators also separately obtained data from a boat belonging to Bart Edmiston Jr. before Katie McCormick was correctly identified as the woman Nolan had spent time with on the island. Investigators visited the residence of a woman named Laney, who had initially been connected to the group in early reports. That lead did not hold. Katie McCormick, 19, remains the last confirmed person to have spent significant time with Nolan before the boats left. She has not spoken publicly. Her family says she has cooperated with investigators. There is one additional detail that has not been officially addressed. The surveillance footage from Warren Hudson's dock the morning of July 4th shows nearly 24 people preparing to leave across 3 boats. When that footage is compared against the boat Nolan was seen on in photographs taken at Horn Island, the vessels do not appear to match. That discrepancy, which boat Nolan arrived on versus what the dock footage shows, has not been explained by law enforcement or by any member of the group in any public statement. More than 60 witnesses have been interviewed. The grand jury process is moving forward under District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath. A reward of $125,000 is in place. Ben Crump's public position as of late July 2026 is unchanged. The accounts that have been offered do not align with each other, and every fact must go before the grand jury without exception. The question this case has not yet answered is the same question it started with. What happened on Horn Island between 3 p.m. and the moment that boat engine turned over and the vessel pulled away from the island on the afternoon of July 4, 2026? And who among the people who were standing on that beach knows more than they have said? That question is still waiting for an answer. This is where the case stands right now. The grand jury has not yet convened. The state autopsy results have not been released. The toxicology findings remain withheld. The FBI is active on two separate fronts: digital evidence review and the investigation of interstate threats. The independent autopsy returned an undetermined finding that could not rule out non-accidental factors. More than 60 witnesses have given statements. 2 members of the group who were present on Horn Island that day have retained private defense attorneys. A reward of $125,000 is in place for information leading to an arrest and conviction. And the accounts offered by the people who were closest to Nolan in his final hours on that island have not been reconciled with each other. The case is not closed. Not by law enforcement. Not by the family. Not by the legal team representing them. Not by the federal agency now involved in 2 capacities. The file is open. And the people with the authority to close it have indicated clearly that they are not finished. Christine Wansley and Elmore Wansley are still waiting. That is the reality underneath every press conference, every legal filing, every public statement, and every development this case has produced since the night of July 4th. 2 parents who sent their son out on a holiday and received a phone call that no parent should ever receive. They have not been given a cause of death by the state that conducted the autopsy on their child. They have not been told definitively what happened in the hours between the last time someone saw Nolan standing on Horn Island and the moment his body was found in the water 2 days later. What they have been given is silence from the institutions that owe them answers, and noise from the corners of the internet that owe them nothing. They deserve better than that. And they have said so clearly and consistently every time they have stood in front of a microphone. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. He was a wide receiver with a football camp starting on Monday. His coach Jake Braramlett said he led without needing to be the loudest voice in the room. His principal Dr. Jacob Dykes said he was one of the best to come through the building. His mother Christine said his heart was too big for a world that would not always return it the same way. His father Elmore said he preached one rule to his son every single day: if you go with a group, you stay with the group. Nolan did not make it home. The truth about why is still out there. And this channel will be here when it surfaces. If this case matters to you, subscribe to Unsolved Files right now. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think the grand jury is going to find when this investigation reaches that table. We read every single one. Every update on this case comes here first. Do not miss it.